No? Okay. Um, any questions or concerns about the final that's coming up here not too awful long?
Is there a particular study guide? Is there a
No, primarily it's going to come from these slides, so it's not overly difficult. So if you're familiar with the reading material and the slides, you're going to do very well. So it's not all that difficult. It's really to reinforce the material. So.
Is there a link where we can just pull up the slides, or is strictly in the video link? Because I had looked for that and I didn't see a link for that.
For the slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, they should be in the info section of the web page for this course.
But it's only one set that I saw.
Yeah, it's one set. That's all of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't. I opened it up and I thought it was for each week you would have a different link. Okay.
No. Well, it is, but then if we don't finish all those slides, then I got to remove slides and adjust. So you should have 133 slides roughly, or somewhere around there.
Okay.
So, yeah. Let me get back up here. Where was I?
When is the link going to open for that?
Let me check here quick. I don't recall. I just looked at it the other night, but
I think it said the 19th.
Is that what it might be? I did not pay that close attention to it.
I could be wrong, but I thought it said 19th.
That's the deadline, Kevin, or does it open on the 19th and we have till the following week? Does anyone know?
I think it opens on the 19th.
Yeah, it opens on the 19th at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's available till 30 June, but it's due on the 26th. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing left is your if you haven't done the counseling disciplines and specialty area paper, and then your online discussion boards. But one of those, number 5's already come and gone, and then number 6 is due next week. So it's due on the 17th. So overall, how have you found the workload? What compared to other courses, and maybe this is the first 8-week course you've had, I don't know. I mean, when you think about it, there's 16 weeks of material pushed into 2 or 8 weeks. So how has that been in comparison?
I think it's been very easy.
Okay.
It hasn't begged for their, I mean, unfortunately I'm unusual circumstances, but it hasn't begged for strenuous guidelines. I found it to be flexible. I mean, like the content of what you're asking.
Yeah, right. Okay. Other thoughts? What are you thinking?
I thought it fit pretty well into 8 weeks.
Okay. All right. Ashley, your thoughts?
In comparison to other classes that I've taken, because I've taken several, mini courses, if you will, and I've learned a lot more because it hasn't been jam-packed. I've been able to relax a little bit, and
okay.
So, and that's just my opinion.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Joni, how about you? Any insight?
I've taken 8-week courses, and this one was fairly easy.
Okay.
Of course, my timeline with it being the summer made it difficult, but as far as the workload goes, it wasn't
too bad.
It wasn't overbearing.
Well, keep in mind, this is a 100 level course. So
how is this going to expand into your next B term? I saw that you're teaching the B term counseling.
Yeah, well, that's a completely different course. That one is really on counseling modalities. So okay. It'll be a much more in-depth look at the different types of approaches to counseling and some of those things. So that one's the first time it's been taught, to be honest. So there's a lot of growth in pain in some ways for the program, just because we're starting from scratch and developing things from nothing, really. And I'm trying to err on the side of being not as heavy as opposed to too heavy. So I've tried to keep it a little more manageable. And then I can always add things in as we continue to repeat courses and kind of adjust the level. But I don't think it's fair just because it's a new course to slam dunk people with a lot of information. That just doesn't seem right to me. So, okay, good. Very good. Well, I appreciate the help and the insight there. Just keep in mind that with the different levels of courses, there's kind of a filter that we have to use as far as the number and the length of papers that we can put in there. I've been very how would I say, generous on the papers as far as being a stickler for grammar and formatting in particular. This fall that changes. We switched to instead of I think it's Chicago, we go to Turbine, which is similar but different. So there'll be some changes there. But once that gets settled, then the formatting pen will come out at some point and help people kind of hit the mark more with the expectation there. It's important if you're going to go on to higher levels of learning, you're going to have to get that stuff kind of figured out. You just they will not be easy on you in those areas. So, but okay. Well, let's move on here to look at some material today. Look at the process of counseling. Have you been able to watch any of the videos? From the links?
I've watched them.
Okay. Anything from those that stand out as far as the quality, the information? What do you think? Again, this is a very basic course overview. So
Okay.
Helpful, good, not good?
My favorite video is still the "Stop it."
Yeah, me too.
You've piqued my interest substantially in the areas of PTSD healing.
Okay.
I think maybe after watching the video, as far as it just kind of touches on building some curiosity into it, but I would love to know some of the research links behind it, or supportive information on how it's utilized.
Okay.
But that's just
Yeah.
That is my natural curiosity. It leads me into, that, like the sonic still face, and
yeah,
that just led me into additional curiosity of some of the supporting evidence behind it. And when I was doing the research for writing some of the techniques, I actually stumbled into like a psychology website that talked more about that particular type of treatment, and that the cognitive behavior was the preferred, obviously, for depression.
Yeah, right.
So it was nice to see some of the psychology journals behind what it is that you do and the options for PTSD. So that's just my thoughts. But
okay, all right, good, very good. Well, let's talk about the process of counseling. Just some of the different dynamics that are involved with any time that we're working with someone in counseling. We've talked a little bit about this, the connecting piece and building rapport and alliance with their client. Studies, again, are very clear that the more a person trusts their therapist, the more effective the counseling is going to be. It's really vital. And as the age goes down, that importance goes up. So for kids, it's absolutely important that they be able to trust their therapist and have a good relationship with them. So it's important to allow exploring without gossiping or becoming friends. It's necessary to let the client just kind of talk about their story. what has happened to them, how they've experienced it. That's really vital. Planning. If you're going to go into particularly insurance-based reimbursement type counseling, then it is, or if you're going to be licensed at all, I should say, that's really the truth of the matter. Then there needs to be a kind of a format of what you do, and it's got to be pretty tight. So you have your intake session that you do to gather history of a client. Then you develop a treatment plan. And from the treatment plan then flows your course of events that you're going to use to engage your client and go after the goals that they've identified that they want to come out from counseling with. So having those goals and the actions to fix the problem is a really important part of the treatment plan all around. And more, especially in the insurance realm, they're becoming pretty much sticklers about this. They will come in and audit, and if they don't see the connection between your intake, your treatment plan, and what you're doing in your sessions, they often will come in and take the money back because you're not playing by good, solid counseling, professional, ethical rules. And that's a problem. They're looking for outcomes with clients, as they should. So the idea that, we can spend years and years with a client who has some minor issues is not acceptable anymore. And sadly to say, there's quite a few therapists who approach things that way. Progression, moving towards the goals, is a really important concept. And then stopping. How do we pause or terminate because we've gotten to where we needed to get to? Some clients don't have the desire or the need to go beyond a certain place in their life, and they're okay with that. And so we become okay with that as their counselors. So these are important concepts here. The theories of counseling, there's probably maybe a couple dozen main theories around counseling and how we approach it. And the reality is, and studies show this, that how would I say it? If you use a particular modality, like cognitive behavioral therapy is a very popular and common approach. Okay, if I just use CBT and know its techniques and the way to intervene with it, I'm going to have success with my clients. And studies show that. They demonstrate that we have that. So there's no one particular way to do counseling. I think what's unique as Christians is that we bring in a theological, biblical perspective that can be very helpful in places where secular counseling techniques and modalities can't. So there is no one single right way to counsel. You do want to be congruent, though, as a person. So that means a couple things. One, your life needs to kind of fit what you preach, so to speak, or how you approach counseling. If the advice we're giving is not advice we're living, that's going to be a problem. And eventually it's going to find its way out in our own unhealthiness, but also we oftentimes aren't going to have that kind of effect on our clients that we might hope. So the idea of congruency is really important. And also congruency with our faith. Are we walking the talk that we're counseling? And that's kind of an important concept. If my marriage is really in trouble, it's going to be difficult for me to approach and work with a couple that's in trouble. There's going to be almost always constant triggers, what we call countertransference going on between therapists and clients, those types of things. Now, that doesn't mean if we've had things that have happened in their life that we can't be an effective counselor, but it's really important that we come to a place where we're okay with those things and we've worked through them, whatever those things are. So if I have PTSD and I'm not over my PTSD, I have not worked through those things, it's going to be very hard for me to help somebody else with PTSD. I can't give what I don't have. And that's a common challenge within this profession, very, very significantly so. And understand that you can genuinely be wrong in these areas. We can misinterpret our congruency with our faith. We can misinterpret our own personal congruency in life, and generally just misread things. So I think we know that we all fall short, right? We're all sinners and we fall short of the glory of God. So I think it's kind of addressing that reality that can be in the room with our clients. So any thoughts on that from anyone? Anything that you saw stick out from your the interview that you did in your reflection paper that you submitted? Any of these kinds of concepts stick out in your mind that where some of you addressed some of these ideas in your papers? You noticed things, and a lot of you had pretty good insight into when I was doing this, I recognized that maybe this was a different way I could have gone. Some things like that. So any thoughts on that from any of you? No? Okay, quiet group tonight. Huh? All right. Taking counseling home. This is a huge challenge for therapists. What is the learning style of your client? Do they hear better, see better, or do better? So our orientation toward our client needs to address some of these insights and judgments that we might develop around them, given our time with them. So some of that can be picked up pretty easily and quickly, but some people are not good at listening. They're much better at doing. So the activities that we might use as part of their treatment plan would be doing activities as opposed to hearing activities. Or bibliotherapy, using books and reading. And, that works very well with some people, but others, it really doesn't work well at all. They're not readers, or they have some kind of learning disability and they don't use those things very well. So we want to orient the activities that we have to our client's style. It's great to have homework and some things like that, but if you have a client who's got a pretty busy life, as many of you all do, homework is going to be a challenge. They've got kids at home, and this is a kind of an add-on thing that they're trying to do to get better. They're not going to have the time to spend and invest in homework. They've got kids to raise. They got to make a living. So all those types of things are challenges for our clients as much as us. So we might use discussions, study guides. Sometimes if you're working with teens, adolescents, music could be a form of homework. You might have them put together the list of their music and pick out the lyrics and the verses that seem to resonate with how they feel about things that are going on. So that can be a way of interacting and discussing with them parts of their life. You might have them journal. You might have them use internet resources. That often can do that. There are some interactions out there for neurofeedback that include video games for kids with ADD and ADHD and some of these different types of challenges. And the video games, actually through the form of neurofeedback, can be corrective in their application. So other computer resources, apps, things like that. Let's say you have a client who's anxious. You might use different types of apps that are mindfulness type apps that help them challenge or practice breathing differently, or having mindfulness type exercises that they might do throughout the day. Groups in counseling. This is a popular form of counseling, is doing it through groups. You see this very frequently in addictions care. So they're valuable in that they create this climate of mutual support and encouragement with those who most need it. They need support systems very often for those who have addictions. It can instill this hope and optimism because you see people who are further along than you, but who have been through what you've been through. So you might be feeling hopeless, whereas you can look around the room and see people who've walked that same path, but now are at a better place. So that's important. The idea of feeling alone is often helped through the group process if you have a skilled leader. At the same time, one of the things to be careful of in groups is that people can be in a group and feel even more alone because they don't fit in for some reason. So it's something to be really kind of cognizant of. There's a lot of information that can be put out there. You can get feedback from other members and give feedback to other members about how they're perceived and what others might see in them. There's almost always like a BS meter in an addictions group that everybody knows. And it's like, nah, that's BS. That's an excuse. That's enabling. That's whatever. And you know, the group will call each other out on those types of behaviors. So, did that. We did that. So the idea, just to talk briefly about the interview and counseling video project or audio project, was really just to kind of give you an experience, if you haven't had one, of being under a recording and interacting with someone around a specific purpose. So that's kind of the idea behind that whole event, was to just kind of put you a little bit on the spot, not too much, talking about something that's typically pretty easy to talk about for you all, which is faith, and not to criticize the person that you were working with, but rather to simply listen to their story and get a perspective on how you might go and go further with them if you were to continue to see them. So that was kind of the gist of that project. So the intensive one that we did in January, they actually did this as a part of their class in the room together. So they actually did their interviews. They just moved out into separate areas of the room and completed their interview, and then they did the actual reflection paper and all that stuff after on their own time. How many of you have done any type of work like that before? Anybody? Where you've actually sat down with someone and kind of intentionally talked about a specific part of their life? Is that something any of you have done? Okay. Did that feel natural to you at all, or was it challenging? Was it a little nerve-wracking? For some it was. For others it was. They seemed to be pretty much naturals at it in many ways. So,
Chris.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna back up just a second. That process of trying to understand a personality trait and teaching to the personality trait. Mm-hmm. Have you ever, in writing curriculum management, as far as like managing individuals, heard of FORMAT? The studies of Bernice McCarthy?
No.
So I guess in brief, you'd have to kind of do research on it, but they interviewed like 3,500 students in Harvard to figure out how they learned.
Oh, yeah.
And they were able to bring it down to like 8 different personality styles, but 4 different ways of learning inside of those 8 different personality styles. And now they're creating curriculum-based learning. But like, you can actually give someone a test and it will show you what personality style and what learning style those people fall under, so you can cater to their learning style and their educational style. And they actually have a software that you can put any type of curriculum in, and it will spit it out for the 4 different learning styles. So what they've discovered is that, and I'm getting to my point in this, what they discovered is that there's only 2 different learning textbooks and ACT test, SAT test, and we cater to the 2 learning styles, but we don't cater to the other 2 learning styles.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So
that's been a story. Yeah.
So my question is do you, like, I don't know that I believe wholly in some of these diagnoses that people are encountering
Mm,
medicinally, more so that I believe that society in a whole isn't addressing
yeah,
other learning styles, such as like musical rhythmical. Like you said, you can give them music and it will change them. So,
right.
I mean, I think what helps me in speaking to anyone about that is I'm actually able to automatically, when I meet them, assess what is their learning style and what is their personality trait that
Hmm.
I'm actually
Yeah,
going to be speaking to. But
yeah,
also helped us into developing our curriculums for our school to go through accreditation. But like Forbes is actually starting to now make name tags color coded so you can recognize the colors of the world. Like, so you know what the personality, because certain personalities don't coincide with one another
yeah, right.
directly.
Yeah,
So it's been a fascinating study for me to understand it that way
yeah.
and how I would intend to take that into counseling. But do you feel like some of these diagnosis that people have, I don't know that I wholly believe in mental, yeah, maybe true psychotropic diagnosis, but some of these learning styles that people come in with and they're being medicated for, I don't know that I wholly believe, and I think that we're missing.
Yeah, right, right. Well, I would say that there's definitely some truth to that. I don't think the DSM-5, which is what we currently use, it's a big thick book. I don't know if I have one here. I think they're at work, but Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, is kind of like the Bible for diagnosing conditions, behavioral health conditions, and so is that diagnosis accurate? Does it actually describe some kind of dysfunction even? And I would say probably a lot of the time it does, but it really depends on the diagnoser. How well versed are they at picking up on things, and are they able to sort through some of the things you've talked about? Is this just simply kind of a mix up and a mismatch with learning styles, or is this truly some kind of pathological problem that the client might have? And I don't think there's a great answer to that, frankly. I mean, it's important in some ways to be able to help people because it helps to name a problem potentially. But at the same time, is there damage that comes from labeling people with some kind of disorder? And I think there is, part of the pushback you get oftentimes from Christian counselors versus, the more traditional types of counseling approaches out there. So you have a wide spectrum of how people look at that and how they want to respond to it. It's a necessity if you're in business because that's how you're going to get reimbursed. If there's no medical necessity, you can't charge that for reimbursement. It's not going to happen. The client would have to be paying cash in order for that to continue. So
I guess would you say the alternate to these more modern approaches or scientific approaches of diagnosing is to, if we're applying biblical principle to that, I don't know that I wholly believe that people are as mentally ill as what they say they are, as much as they're not living inside of their spiritual gifts. If we're divinely made with a purpose and our personalities were divinely created through Christ, some of these mental illnesses are actually somebody's gift.
Well,
Maybe
I think,
to utilize correctly.
Yeah.
And I when I look at some of these personality traits and they say, oh, well, he's ADD or he's a slow learner or he's not a leader, maybe that's not their spiritual gifting testing. So the alternate side to that formation of learning, you have two ways of approaching. You have psychiatric and you have Christian. Which one do you want to believe? And I don't believe in the pharmacology of as much as I believe in the spiritual development of an individual.
Sure. Well, I admit that it's a challenge, to be honest, to sort a lot of that out. At the same time, I think there's a danger associated with not having diagnoses. And the problem is that then people are going to kind of go to the other realm and say, well, there's nothing really wrong with you.
Correct.
Which is almost as dismissive and as uncaring as the giving someone a label approach. It's like, well, whatever, you're good. You don't need help because there's nothing wrong. We tend to help when there's something wrong, right?
Right.
So I think finding that kind of sweet spot in between there is really the key. I think we overuse medication, diagnosing, some of those types of things. At the same time, we can underuse them. And I think that the integration piece is probably where the sweet spot lies, that we don't get too fired up about diagnosing. We're more concerned with getting people to a healthy place where they can fully reflect their gifts, whatever those gifts are. And that's a challenge. It really is. And one of the challenges is that most therapists, if you took a cross section, you have the rising therapists who have just been trained and don't have a lot of experience looking at and assessing these types of things going on in people's lives, versus those who've been around and at it for a couple decades, who have a lot more insight into the diagnoses that might be a part of that client's challenges. So it's really hard, I think, to kind of sort that out and come to just one place and say, wow, this is the right way. I think it really needs to be much more eclectic and integrative than just a kind of a black and white view. And what I've seen personally is that when we start using black and white perspectives, it's our attempt to create security and control in our life. And I think that's a dangerous place for any profession to be, where things are that clear. And it usually doesn't work very well. So you see this in faith perspectives all the time. Many denominations and many churches are very rigid in their approach to faith, and it's very much an attempt to create control and security in spiritual realms, when there aren't answers a lot of times in spiritual realms for the things that are going on. It's much more gray than black and white in faith.
Right.
So I don't know, thoughts on that from anybody? I mean, this is a big issue in our culture, for sure. Yeah.
Especially in youth rehabilitation, they come in with these stickers, well, I'm
this, I'm that. Yeah.
I'm ADD, I'm slow learner, and it's really predicting the rest of their futures. When I look at them and I say,
Yep.
who gave you that label? And let's really explore what is your learning style, and then let me figure out if you're truly ADD. I just
right. Yeah.
Normally 90% of the time we use the format technique to see if we could overcome youth learning disabilities, and we had 100% success ratio. So I mean, I'm curious. That's why I'm asking. How much
well, I think there's always a better way to build a widget. So I think we can always continue to improve our game, for sure. I just think that's true. But there's other things out there I think we're learning, but the system does not want to change very much. So the big pharma folks, the ones who produce and make all the meds, they don't want to see things like Bessel van der Kolk's childhood trauma disorder ever get approved. Because that would mean that if we could change family systems and we could improve the outcomes based on family development, then I don't need the drugs that they're making.
Correct.
I can fix these problems in other ways. And that gets a lot of pushback. And he's been fighting that for almost 20 years now, to get that diagnostic capability within the DSM, and it won't get approved. And it probably won't get approved because a lot of that money comes from the big pharmacy companies. So there's that underlying theme that says, no, we're not doing that. I hate to be that jaded about some of these things, but I think that there's probably some truth to that. And that's why you see people that will only work for cash. They don't want to play by insurance rules. You see Christian counselors who say, well, this is all faith issues. If people just came to Jesus, they would not have any problems. Well, that's not true. Because there's all kinds of people in church that are having all kinds of issues, and they came to Jesus.
Right.
Well,
So
Jesus told us we'd have struggles.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, struggle is a part of life. And I think we just have a very Pollyanna view sometimes of how this is all supposed to work out. It's just not that way. You just take a cross section of your own past and look and see what's there. And it's a challenge. You didn't get to pick the parents you had.
Right.
I didn't. And my parents were far from perfect. They weren't horrible, but they weren't great either. So what does that mean for me? What does it mean for my kids? What does it mean for my grandkids? Because all that stuff tends to be visited, right? And go on from generation to generation. So, but I do think we can become effective at breaking cycles. And I think sometimes that's the challenge that we have ourselves, but then also what we try to do in therapy is to help people break cycles. We may not break it completely, but we may change the course.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part of our goal and in working with people. So it is definitely a challenge for sure. So
Good thoughts.
yeah. Well, let's look at some legal stuff here. These are this is a growing area. It is very, very significant and growing very significant. Actually, here in a couple weeks, I'm going to go down and speak to the South Carolina Christian Counseling Coalition. I don't know what their full name is, but and it's on ethics. And the challenge there is that we have many therapists who are Christians, maybe Christian counselors, but they're licensed in what we might say are secular realms. So marriage and family therapy, licensed professional counselors, social workers, but they're believers, and they want to counsel people from a belief perspective, a biblical perspective. The problem is that the ethics that are written for each of these different types of professional disciplines have moved more and more away from any semblance of biblical truths to much more of anything goes. So we see this around a lot of the gender dysphoria issues, the marriage issues that are so prevalent in our culture right now and have been for maybe the last 10 years. They've really kind of grown and expanded. The problem is that the ethics for these different disciplines are almost, for lack of a better term, outlawing. It's not a law, but it's an ethics that they put into their codes that says you can't counsel people. If you're an LPC, a social worker, or a marriage and family therapist, you can't even talk about faith. And they're trying to write the ethics in such a way that that's almost banned from consideration. And that's a pretty significant problem. So how do we deal with that in loving ways and in I would say courageous ways as well? Because we're in many ways losing the very fabric of our culture from a moral standpoint. So something to think about. There's this huge changing tide with ethic and moral issues in Christian counseling. It's very, very significant. So we need people who are going to stand up and be present and be accountable to what we understand to be truth from Scripture. How do we counsel the sinner but not hate them? How do we allow and lead them to better choices, healthier choices, without trying to impose our own view on them? Things like that. So these are some of the challenges, but there's this growing lack of scriptural authority for many, even Christian therapists, Christian counselors. Here's the other thing, though. If God's word is true, what do we have to fear? We already know the end of the game, right? God wins. So why would we get so upset over a lot of these social issues and spend a lot of our energy, our selfish, self-centered, emotional energy on trying to defend things that is God's business to defend. And I think we see this a lot. Is it's almost like we as Christians live in this world that we're more afraid of the world than we are of God Himself, and that is a significant problem. We've kind of forgotten in some ways who God is, and the reality that He's already won the battle, and it's not us that's going to win the battle. He might use us to win the battle, but He is He's sovereign over all these things, and we just kind of forget that, it seems. Think of any time you worry about anything. Doesn't matter how simple it is, how insignificant it is. If you've worried about it, you've just forgotten who God is in that moment. It's that simple. And of course, those can be very minor ramifications for that, or they can be very significant ones when we worry. Okay. We must be able to relate truth to our clients' lives. And if we can't do that as therapists, especially Christian therapists, we've got a pretty significant problem. And what I see a lot of times is that Christian therapists do not have a very strong biblical or theological foundation. And if they do, it's the type that says it's black and white. And they do not have the ability to interact and draw people toward healthiness, to make Scripture, to make the gospel inviting, so that they might even take a sip of it, let alone drink it. And I see that quite frequently. So there's groups within this, or sections within this group I'm going to speak to, that really are on the hard line side, of things, and want to draw these really clear black and white boundaries. And what's sad is it's all about security and control. It's not about trusting God. It's about them trying to control the outcomes. In that, what I see is a real challenge in the worldviews that we have out there. So the worldview of us as counselors then is the lens through which we see and understand the world. Now, no two worldviews may be exactly the same, but hopefully they have some assumptions and beliefs, though, that collectively work together to guide our behavior. So one worldview might be, well, I don't steal. Okay, so hopefully that's something that would guide my behavior, and I would choose not to steal if I have the opportunity or ever take the opportunity. So any thoughts on that? What would you say are some of the main areas of your own worldview that you might have?
Are you asking from where we get our universal belief system?
Yeah, just what are some components of your worldview that you think about that guide your, what assumptions and beliefs guide your behavior? If you say God is sovereign over the universe, everything that's made, well, at some level that has to affect and guide your behavior. If I value as an absolute truth the concept of family, for example, if that's a lens through which I see and understand the world, then that becomes important to me, and that should guide my behavior, not just in how I interact with other people's families, but in how I interact with my own family. Or do I come home and am I just a jackass and don't really care how I treat my wife or my kids? Doesn't matter how I talk to them, or, is that what I live out? So these assumptions and beliefs are really important in guiding our behavior. What are some of those for you all? Take money. Start with that one. What are your assumptions and beliefs about money and finances?
I have a very complicated answer to. I mean,
Well, simplify it.
Well, right. I mean, where did we get our 10 commandments and why are they
Hmm.
appropriate for past and future? I mean, if you go back and study the root of the 10 commandments and why they were able through church history to be applied throughout time and be in our future, those would be based upon our community in a whole that would actually answer 90% of the way that we think. And each time I think about something like, okay, well, is it okay to have an abortion? Well, I don't know. Let's go back and apply it to the 10 commandment. Is it okay to have adultery? I don't know. You can find that law in the 10 commandment.
Sure.
So pretty much everything that you think about, you would have to stop and use it against the universal belief system of the 10 commandments. And where did those 10 commandments derive from? So I'll stop there.
So does that cover when there's domestic violence?
Well, so, I mean, if you go deep into philosophy and ethics, basically they'll say you can tie it back to a root of each commandment.
Yeah. But what if one of the persons doesn't want to live by the 10 commandments?
Right. So that is a challenge for me that I definitely find in communicating, even today with, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Liberals. I mean, when they're making decisions over,
any issue.
You can sit and have this conversation for days with them, but I mean, why are they Republican any more than why am I Christian? So, where are they getting their root systems? At least my root system ties back to. So that is definitely.
Yeah.
How did we derive at our universal belief systems? I mean, you'd have to go all the way back to church history to explain how they evolved and why they had always been appropriate for actually being able to put covenants over a society as a whole.
Well, so using the 10 commandments, how does that direct your money?
Would somebody else like to? I mean,
What do you think?
Other people's thoughts into it.
Well, what are some assumptions and beliefs about money or wealth or even just surviving?
You could probably apply it to 2 or 3 in there as far as
Ashley, what do you got? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I try my best to, live as close to what the Bible says and compare things to, the Bible. As far as finances go, in my situation right now, my husband being the only one that works and me being a stay-at-home mom who's in school full-time, I declare very often, my God will supply all of my needs according to his riches,
Sure.
But I believe that that God desires for us to be prosperous, that and be in health even as our souls prosper. So that I think that includes finances, having the resources that we need to fulfill the purpose that we were created for. And sometimes that looks bigger for some people that, some people need more wealth because they have a bigger population to reach or whatever. But some people, that's kind of where I'm at with it. There was something else it left me. Oh goodness.
Okay.
It was a good point. It was good, but
we'll trust that.
Maybe it'll come back.
Apply money. I mean, one of the commandments is thou shalt have no other God. Well, money is our God. I mean, right? Does it not control? I mean, most people can worship money as if it's their God. So you can tie that back to a universal belief system that you are what you worship. Are you putting God first or your money first? I mean,
well, we could say that about our kids too, right? We put our kids oftentimes before God.
I mean, you can put almost every challenge.
Yep, absolutely.
That we have up against our universal belief system of the 10 commandments, and there's going to be a guiding principle in the commandment. Now, where we argue in court, Roe versus Wade, or science has continued to evolve and not always answer its development, such as stem cell research and stuff like that. Like, are we accurately applying those to universal belief systems? I mean, that's where it becomes the skewed line is these con science issues,
Yeah.
or
Sure. Well, it's interesting because in Matthew it talks about what's the greatest law, right? And Jesus sums up the whole law in two quick commandments, and neither one of them is about what you don't do. It's about what you do. So it's love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
So there's a whole lot of freedom that if we think of living biblically, and from a holistic view of Scripture, not just Old or New Testament, but holistically, it's about being offensive with the gospel rather than defensive. It's not about if I can keep my kids from drinking or sex or any other bad thing that might happen to them. It's about me equipping them as a parent for how God might use them in impacting the world, to be thermostats, not thermometers, kind of idea. And I think that's part of the worldview, though, that we catch from our family of system is just that. We catch some of these different ideas that begin to define our assumptions and beliefs. And the problem is that they're not always accurate. And a lot of Scripture Scripture, I would say, even though it's infallible, and inerrant, there is an interpretive dynamic to it. And it's not always as clear and as clean as we would like it to be to answer some of these tougher questions about life that we struggle with. I don't know. Other thoughts, Ashley or Kevin?
Yeah. Can I share just something along the lines of the 10 Commandments?
Sure, absolutely.
Galatians 5, I can't remember the verse, but it says what law do you give to a man full of love? So, if you're living full of love, you don't need any laws. So.
Right. Yeah. And how I might love my neighbor could be very different than how might you love your neighbor based on the gifts and the skill sets that God has given us.
Yeah.
They can be very, very different, yet very valuable. I think that's part of the message when we talk about gifts and things like that within the body of the church, the body of Christ, that we all have different abilities and gifts. We like to make some gifts more important than others. Like the true test of being a Christian is if you're a missionary. There's the pinnacle of faith is, if you give up everything and go to some overseas country and share the gospel. And we can easily forget about the very kids and within our own household about some of those things. So these are not easy things. We're certainly not going to discuss or get them all solved here tonight for sure. But one of the best places to start with a worldview is with our clients' own words. How do they describe? And that's really what we're trying to discern when we work with people in counseling is how do we understand and discern their worldview and help them to understand what that might mean for them. Lead some of them, some of their choices and some of their beliefs to their logical conclusions. So if I believe, same-sex marriage is okay, well, then does that pass the test of continuing the human species? And in my mind, it doesn't pass the test. Why would we create or why would we adopt a worldview that actually leads to our very demise and undermines the very life that we're trying to live? From those standpoints alone, just scientifically, doesn't seem to make sense. Does that mean that someone can't have a tendency or a passion for a same-sex relationship? Well, no. The whole world is tainted. Sin is all over in the universe. So every aspect of creation is tainted by sin. So it doesn't surprise me that these things would be challenges and things that our clients might face, or that we might even face. So I think that's it's okay for that. We're just not comfortable sometimes with challenge, and very often we'll make some issue more important than having a relationship with God, and I think that's always a problem. So consider, here's a couple examples from the reading, how worldviews could impact the counseling of a woman with depression. Some counselors see emotional problems as basically biological, which there's some truth to that. Okay. So the person is giving antidepressant medication, encouraged to have a complete physical examination. Counselors who see problems as the result of stress and inability to cope might work to help the counselee understand her pressures and learn new stress management techniques, different ways of thinking, including self-talks, or new forms of behaviors. That's one approach. Not necessarily bad, but it's an approach. Others take a system approach. They look for ways in which one system of friends, family, work, colleagues, environmental influences, or church leaders both create problems and can become the means through which healing comes. More common has been the view that problems come from within, from the past experiences and buried conflicts that need to be uncovered and handled through insight. A large group of Christians believe that if anyone has a problem, it is because that person has sinned, so recovery depends on confession and going one's way without sinning further.
That sounds a little bit like the Pharisees, though, to me.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, whitewashed tombs. We're only looking at the outside. We're not looking at the inside. If you just fix your problems, you wouldn't have any problems. Duh. It's like, okay, whatever. Some of the depressed woman's friends might think the problems would be gone if she would just cheer up, if she would just get better. There's a good solution. I'm down. Oh, just feel happy. And then you won't be down anymore, and then you're all good. It doesn't work like that, okay? Christian friends might assume that everyone would be fine if they would just pray, or if she would just pray about her problem and trust God. That's the issue. You just got to spend more time praying and trusting God that your depression could go away. Some think that she should attend the healing service or see somebody who believes that a power encounter is needed in which there is a confrontation with demonic forces that are dragging her down physically, psychologically, and spiritually. These are all characteristics of different worldviews in how people approach people with problems. So which one's right?
The right one.
The right one, yeah, the right one. Well, I would say God is right. That's what I would say. God.
Well, I would say that varies individually. Like,
what's that?
The right approach is going to vary from individual to the next individual, and you have to bring that from your own belief system.
Yeah,
and that will be where you will be most effective, is if you're following your belief system and not saying, oh, Ashley does it this way, so I should do it this way.
Yeah.
Because we may each be very effective or very much not effective.
Yeah, there's that.
But we will all find our highest level or optimal level of effectiveness if we're like believing our approach.
Okay.
We're confident in it, and that's like, this is how I need to approach it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm the only one that needs to approach it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's the right one. And even if it's wrong, that's the right one in my practice. If that makes any sense.
So there's a little verse that's in, I think it's Philippians 4:29, and it goes like this: let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth. Only that which edifies, that builds up and gives grace. I wonder if that's the approach.
That's not a bad one.
Yeah, it's not a bad one, right? I think it's pretty good. The challenge there is, what does that require from us? It requires humility. It requires us to submit our own thought processes and ideas to God so that he might use us through our gifts and unique ways of saying things, maybe to edify, to build up this person. So it comes back to how are we living our own lives personally before God? And from that, oftentimes, is the very insight, the grace, the different ideas that we would need to be able to help that person who might be struggling. And I think therein is part of the answer. Is that's why I say God's the answer, is that we need to submit to him. We need to humble ourselves to him and curb our own issues almost more than anything else, because we tend to put our stuff on other people, whether it's our views of God, you name it. Think about this. Everybody Jesus healed did what?
Walk away.
They all died.
Oh.
They didn't thank him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some did, some didn't. But the fact of the matter is they were all healed physically, but they all died. So was the whole point to live eternally, or to be healed and be given life? Was that the point of that?
Well, in John chapter 9, when he heals the blind man, he says, they ask him if the man's blind because of his sin or his parents' sin. And Jesus said, he's not this way because of sin. I'm paraphrasing it.
Yeah.
This is so that God can show his mighty works through him.
There you go. So the whole idea then is how God is still in power and sovereign. And I think that's what our counseling needs to reflect, is that reality and that truth. Not our wisdom and knowing all these special things and, knowing ethics and moral issues and all this stuff, which is, it's not that those don't have some importance, but I think we get off track kind of trying to be too much up here and not enough down here. And that's kind of how I would kind of reflect that. So,
share something?
Yeah, go for it.
In Corinthians, when it's talking about the spiritual gifts, it goes through all of them. At the very end, it says, "Now eagerly desire the greater gifts," the very last verse. If you look that up, it literally means to desire the gift that is most needed in the moment that you're in.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have my husband and I have been in ministry for quite a while. We've done street evangelism and marketplace ministry, and I mean, I can tell you, out of the hundreds of encounters that we've had on the street, that never have we done it the same ever. It's always like, it may be similar, but when we minister to people, it's been different every single time.
Yeah.
And it's been, when the Holy Spirit has shown up, it has been just, we've had these powerful experiences, but it hasn't been anything that I've known to do. It's just, come out of an overflow of just God's heart. Like, I just simply love, like, I've gotten his love, and his love overflows in a way that, touches them and heals them in some, so.
So how does that play out when you look at things like church growth and church planning and all these things, and you see these conferences and things that get together and say, oh, well, here's the way to build a church. Here's the way to impact people, and I think you're right, Ashley. There is no one way to do any of those things. And as soon as we start trying to mimic somebody else's approach, we've lost our.
I can't lose you.
What's that? Say one more time.
The signal is lost or something.
Oh. Is it better?
Yeah, a little. Well,
not sure.
You're delayed.
Oh, it's. Okay, I got Kevin back. Can you hear me now?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Still delayed a little bit, though.
Still delayed a little bit. Hey, Ruthie, I didn't even see you on there.
Oh yeah, I was just getting in from work. I sent a message that I was, running late.
Oh, well, that's okay. Yeah, no issues. But are you getting the shared slides yet or no?
Yes, I'm getting them.
Okay. Get back on here. There we go. Okay, good. So, there we go. All right. I kind of forgot where we're at now, but so anyway, there's a lot of these types of conferences and church things, and everybody trying to learn the way or duplicate the way that somebody else has done their growth, and I think that that's kind of it's not that we can't learn different ideas from that maybe, but when we start to mimic somebody else, we're no longer really necessarily dependent on how God is leading us. And I think that's a challenge sometimes. We put more focus on a technique than we actually do with our relationship with God. So, other things, worldview, major topics. What we believe about God is one of those big areas. What do we believe about the universe? How do we get knowledge? What do we believe about human beings? How do we determine right and wrong? Things like that are kind of crucial issues that make up our worldview. And now Scripture addresses a lot of these. And if you go to seminary, very often one of the things you take is called systematic theology. And so they look at different components of God. They break out and you study only Christ. You study sin. You study the nature of man. You study God. And then after you break them all apart, then you begin to put them all back together and see how they interrelate. And most theological curriculums do that. If you're looking to get in like say a Master's of Divinity. So most of the programs that I went through and courses I took kind of did some of those basic those types of ideas. So and that again is typically where we have formed our worldview, is from these different ideas. So and then theological systems and counseling theories then are built on worldviews. Okay, if I believe that there are no absolutes, then who's in charge? Who's in charge if there are no absolutes?
Self.
What's that?
Self.
Self. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Self is in charge. Now think about that statement though. There are no absolutes.
If there are no absolutes, then there's no reason for seeking forgiveness of sins.
Right. But how can that be the only absolute that there are none? It's a contradiction of its own self. It falls under its own weight. And I went to a seminary where that was one of the things that they taught. Is like there are no absolute truths. I said, well, except that truth. And they didn't like that. Well, that's circular thinking. I said, really? How exactly is that circular thinking? You're defining something by what it's not, by what it is. And it said that's not me that's got the circular thinking. And that didn't, but there's people that think that way. There is no right and wrong except that one, which is just determined by them. So, so these are challenges that you'll definitely see out there, I think, and have to work with. You see this in churches. It doesn't matter what denomination or background it is. It is a challenge, no matter what. You'll see it out there. So, so what do we do with these worldviews? So how do we choose and test a worldview? And this is something that life is all about. So one of the things we use is reason. God calls us and says, "Hey, come, let's think about stuff together." So we look for contradictions. We look for inconsistencies. We look at evidence. Does the factual evidence support our view? Does the concept of no truth actually work out in real world life? No, it doesn't. We check it out with others. Is our view relative to what people are experiencing? Do we test it against experience? Truth is true for a reason. Okay? Gravity is an absolute truth. Or is it? What do you think? It's true here. Is it true in outer space? Yeah, if you get close enough, something that has a mass that would create gravity, it would still be true. So the concept is still true. Whether it's experienced or not might be a different story, but the concept of gravity is still true. Compare that to sin. Is sin true? I think so. Okay. Consider whether it feels right. Now, the problem with feeling is it's very subjective, but subjectiveness can have some value. Think about parenting. You know, my wife has a much more subjective view of raising kids than I do because she was with them every day, all day. All that information that she was experiencing with them was very subjective. Not bad, just different. I offered a more objective view because I didn't have that kind of moment by moment connection with my kids. So the truth is somewhere in the middle, that we had to blend our views together to get the right answer for our kids, say. That would be an example of that. And then I would encourage us to change cautiously. Worldviews are important, but they're not inerrant. Nobody's theology is 100%. Doesn't matter what church, what denomination, what school you've been to, everybody has errors in their thinking. And we forget that sometimes. We tend to think, well, my view, my denomination, or my church, or whatever it is the only view, and we live that. And that can be very dangerous and very damning. Let's look at one more here. Other legal issues in counseling. Are you qualified to counsel? And usually that's determined by your state. Their statutes determine who's able to counsel. There's a lot of leeway, though, for Christian counseling. There is often 100% confidentiality, except in the form of abuse, things like that. Those typically still have to be reported. Are you able to identify yourself as a counselor? Many state laws have some very strict requirements about how you sell yourself, so to speak, how you present your title or your capabilities. Can you charge a fee for your services? Well, if you're not part of a church and you're not licensed, you can't. And that's just about in every state, I would say. I'm pretty sure it is by all states. If one of your clients commits suicide, are you liable?
Shouldn't be.
Depends. Depends what state you live in and what the requirements are for that state. If you live in North Carolina, there's no duty to warn, no duty to protect. There's zero requirement for that in North Carolina and a number of other states. You go to California, there absolutely is a requirement for that. You go to New York, Florida.
But how can you prove somebody didn't, because it's possible the counselee is like hiding that.
It's very possible. Yeah. But it better be that your document
deceptive enough.
Yeah. But it better be that your progress notes and your session notes reflect that. Because when they go to court and that family brings you to court and want to look at you because you were the therapist for their family member, they're going to look and see what questions you ask and how did you do your job and things like that. And if the data doesn't support the outcome, there's going to be a problem with that.
See, I would have a really big problem with that because somebody's trying to put, like, they weren't aware of how bad the problem was. Maybe they weren't connecting with the individual enough.
Well, trust me, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I'm a big fan of we're all responsible for our well-being, right?
Yeah, but I don't think you can make somebody else to be a scapegoat because of somebody else's decision.
Well, that's determined by state law.
I would disagree with any of laws that.
Well, I hear you totally, but nonetheless, if you're licensed in that state, you got to play by their laws. And that's kind of where it pays. It really is important that you understand the legal issues in your states and that you play by those rules. This is part of where we're, when we talk about the ethics and some stuff that I was talking about earlier, where that's a real problem because some of the ethical codes are asking Christians to defy and deny the belief systems that they have while they're caring for people. And I think that's problematic. So how much does the state have to do with the laws you have to work by? They have a whole lot to do with it. Every state has laws about counseling and all that. So how much training do you have to have? They define that. Some of you noted that in your, all of you should have noted it in your papers. It's like there's certain requirements to be licensed. You have to have certain number of hours and supervision. If I have a North Carolina license, can I practice in South Carolina or Virginia? Nope. Got to be licensed in those states. You got to have a specific license by that state to be able to do that. That's true for pastoral counselors. Now the license for a pastoral counselor is not like a therapy license. It's a license as a pastor that covers you to do counseling from a theological perspective. You're only certified to be a professional or a pastoral counselor. You're not licensed. Your license is in your ordination in your as a pastor. So there's some nuances to some of these different things that really affect our ethical and moral issues in our counseling approach. So, that's a good place to stop, actually, because the next thing is something different. So, any thoughts or questions on some of those things? There's a lot that goes into some of these areas that if you're going to become a counselor, if you're going to become a therapist, even if it's going to be from a Christian viewpoint, you have to be aware of a lot of these different issues so that you don't get into trouble and you actually do the best you can to help the clients that come to you. So,
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So as far as the laws go, where does deliverance come in as far as counseling goes? Like, I know that, not as a Christian, you can't just go about it like everybody has a demon and they need deliverance, That's not always the case, but it is sometimes the case.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes, yeah.
And Jesus, commissioned us, go cleanse the lepers, heal the sick, cast out devils. So, where does that come in as far as the legality of counseling, or where does that
from a secular standpoint, from state laws, it would simply be covered under the fact that religion is religion, and they can work within those realms as they see fit based on their faith. But if you're going to work in the licensed realm, that stuff is not going to have any, you're not going to find any mention of it in the state laws and statutes, other than they're going to put it under the rubric of faith-based counseling, which would be in a church or as a pastor, those types of things. So if you're working in a church, that has a lot more leeway than if you're working, say, at my group practice. That's not going to fly so well. It's like, no, you can't be doing that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So it really depends on where you're comfortable in working, Now, I would submit, if you're really comfortable and want to reach out into the community, that the real challenge, which is why we picked the approach we have, is to work as therapists who are Christian. Because now you have the option in the impact to reach into people's lives who oftentimes aren't believers, who maybe have some roots in faith but have walked away from the faith by and large. Mm-hmm. And so you have the opportunity to kind of restore, reconnect, reconcile those folks with with the God that they once had some kind of relationship with.
Mhm.
So I think it's a pretty cool option, but that doesn't mean everybody has to have that approach. That's the place I think God has uniquely, say, gifted me to work in those realms, which is great. And I would be wrong to not be faithful to that calling.
Mhm.
But somebody else would be wrong if they weren't in a Christian counseling firm, because that's where they're uniquely gifted, is to work in those realms. And sometimes we want to make one or the other as the enemy, and the other one is the right one. And I think we just have to be careful about some of those perspectives. So, all right,
Thank you.
cool, very good. All right, well, we'll call a halt there for the night. How about that? I think next week is our last session. Is that correct? Is that number 8? I think so, but because I think the week after that is finals week, and we won't meet that week. So, okay. All right, y'all have a great night. Be blessed. Okay, walk upright and be blessed. How about that? All right. Good night. Y'all take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.